Let's take you now to the campus of Michigan State University, where a new class is getting a whole lot of attention, especially if you're a Swiftie. Have you spent the last week listening to Taylor Swift's new album? Well, at Michigan State, they are using Taylor Swift as a learning lesson. The university launching a new class called Society and the Individual, the Taylor Swift Phenomenon. Joining us now is the professor leading that course. It's Emily Muick, an assistant professor with Michigan State Center for Integrative Studies in Social Science. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Producer Mary has spent her entire morning looking for every Taylor Swift cliche she can find to put in the scripts. I'm assuming your syllabus is somewhat similar.
Yes, thank you for having me. It does have, it is a great opportunity to put in as many plays on songs and other Taylor Swift ones as anybody can think of.
Okay, so I want to dive into the class, but before we get there, I have to ask, did you come up with this idea and then go to your dean? And how was that conversation trying to convince them to have you teach a Taylor Swift course?
No, it was actually the opposite. Last fall, we got a petition from a group of students asking us to consider doing some type of Taylor Swift class. A handful of other universities around the country have done similar types of classes where they're looking at Taylor Swift or other pop culture phenomenon. So it came from the students. So I didn't have to do much convincing. The students laid out a very good case. We do some general education topics around sort of complex phenomenon, trying to look at how different social science fields like economics, sociology, history, psychology, political science, how different fields would approach an issue differently. And they laid out a really good case that said, you know, Taylor Swift is such a big phenomenon. She connects to all of these different topics so well. Would you please consider thinking about adding a course like this? And we looked at it and we said, yeah, this sounds like a really good course. They make a great case, and there's obviously student engagement on the issue. So then it was just sort of getting to play with all of the different aspects of Taylor Swift to put the class together, rather than needing to convince deans or other sort of university administration that this needed to happen.
All right, so walk me through the course then. And you know, I say it jokingly, but there really is a lot to learn, from the business aspects of how she has conducted herself to re-recording music for legal reasons. There's a lot that you can spend time on here.
There's a ton. Actually, it ended up being a case of needing to cut things out of the class for time rather than needing to find more areas. We're set up in 3 units. So our first unit was looking at things that she and her team have control over. So we spent some time in that looking at copyright law. What did copyright law look like? How did her re-records happen? What was the economic impact of her re-records? And then other things like the history of American pop music and folk music and country music. Where does this come from? What genres is she pulling from? We are now into our second unit for the class, where we're looking at the fan experience. So talking about things like in-group and out-group dynamics, parasocial relationships. Fortunately, we've got a new album that's dropped in the middle of this unit. So we're getting to look at some sort of oral history recording of events. What does that look like as you're living through an event? And then soon we'll move into our third and final unit, which is looking at the broader cultural effects. So we'll look at things like the economic impact of the Eras Tour on the different cities that it went to. We'll look at the climate impact of Taylor Swift and her, in particular, of the Eras Tour itself. So really, we're engaging with a lot of really very serious issues here, but doing it in a way that students are excited about, they want to learn about, and they have some sort of personal engagement with.
Sure, yeah, it means something to them, which is key in every class you're going to teach. I'm curious, how many comparisons are you doing to look at, you know, Taylor Swift and her impact, especially economically, versus, say, the Beatles or the Stones on different generations?
Well, we did a whole day on Beatlemania and what that looked like for economically, what that looked like musically, what that looked like for the fans, comparing that to Taylor Swift. So we did Beatlemania, and we also looked at Elvis pretty closely. So we're engaging with a lot of other musical acts, right, that have been very successful, that have been very culturally significant. My students also did an assignment where they looked at the songwriting of Bob Dylan, a very good musical lyricist, right, who was trying to engage with a lot of political events going on, right, and comparing it to her music and the way she engages with especially gender.
Which is a very interesting conversation right now because I am not a Swiftie, my daughter is, but my understanding and look at some of the videos is that she spent a lot of time intentionally staying out of the politics game and then jumped in when she felt it was necessary. Have you examined that?
Yes, actually this week my students were looking at that transition. She has a film on Netflix called Miss Americana, and some of that she talks explicitly about how she got into that. So engaging with the idea of why might an artist want to stay sort of apolitical, why they might want to stay out, and what does it mean when you get involved in politics? What does it mean for the politics itself? What does it mean for the artist? What does it mean for the actual person who has this fan following?
Sure. It's not just a political statement.
It
It becomes a business conversation.
Right. And then it also becomes a safety conversation, right? In an age where people have a lot of access to guns, there are lots of security threats. Somebody who's as high profile as Taylor Swift, it also becomes a conversation of, is this going to make people mad? Is this going to increase security concerns? What does that look like?
Gotcha. Okay, so the class itself, is this in-person, virtual? How long was the wait list? Are you going to be doing it again?
So it's an in-person class. Fortunately, I'm back to all in person. It is an in-person class. We meet for twice a week, 2 hours each. And it is listed as a lower level class, so it's mostly freshmen and sophomores.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm going to teach it again. I had sort of thought of it as a one-off class, but in the last sort of week and a half, I've gotten a lot of emails asking if I'd consider to do it again. So we'll see.
Was there a wait list?
There was a wait list. Interestingly, we had the class is made up of about half of the students are very committed Swifties, really like her music, really engage with her music. But there were a handful of students that took the class out of curiosity, right? They know of Taylor Swift, of course, but they haven't necessarily they haven't been to the Eras tour. They wouldn't necessarily consider themselves fans. So there was also engagement from students who maybe didn't think of themselves as Swifties, maybe didn't sort of fully engage. They were just interested in what it would look like to understand this better. And
that probably makes for a better conversation in class.
I'm so grateful for them being there because they add such an interesting dynamic between different groups of students, right? It's so nice to have different opinions in class, and I'm so glad they're there.
Yeah. So are you yourself a Swiftie, or is this something that you just kind of looked at it from a purely academic perspective?
Well, at the start of this process, I did not consider myself a Swiftie. I like her music a lot, but the more I put this class together, the more I was researching and reading and thinking about this. I think I'm starting to get close to being a Swiftie at this point.
If we're teaching the class, I think it's pretty fair to say. Okay, one last quick question. What's one of the things that surprised you in all your research?
I've found it surprising to engage with. She's had such a long career, right? She's been releasing music for about 20 years now. And so a lot of my students are 18 or 19 or 20, right? And so they've had Taylor Swift as a leading pop figure their whole life. And it has been so interesting to hear them talk about how they perceive her transition and her growth as a songwriter, because it's sort of mapped onto their whole life, right? The things they listened to when they, were little, sometimes because their parents were playing it, or it was on the radio, or it was being played in, a school playlist. As they've grown up, they've had Taylor Swift growing up with them. And so that has been what's been so interesting to me, because for some of them, she was, she's older, so it was a couple of steps ahead of them,
Sure.
Almost giving them a advice on what's to come for them, and which I found quite beautiful. So that's been the most interesting to me.
Awesome. Okay, Emily, thank you so much for your time today. And I can almost guarantee you that we could have this conversation again next semester.
Well, thank you very much for having me. That would be great.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.